All right, so today what I want to talk about is the truth about freelancing. I want to talk about some of the difficulties you're definitely going to face, especially when you just get started, and a bunch of things that you have to remember. Freelancing is not an easy way to make a living. And recently I did a couple of videos. One of them was, should you freelance in 2024? And the other one was talking about how to become a WordPress consultant with no code. And one of the comments I got was, it seems like it's a lot of work. And the reality is, it is. When you're working for yourself, when you start a new business, it could be a couple of years before you start turning a profit. And that's if you start a traditional business. But if you're a freelancer, you can actually earn money faster, especially since you can keep your expenses low since you're working from home. But one thing I want to make very clear, it's not easy. Let's talk about it. All right, so what are some of the issues you face when you first start off in the freelancing field? What are things you have to remember and what are things you have to think about? Well, I said in a previous video, you obviously have to have a couple of months of your bills saved up because your expenses, they have to get paid regardless if you're getting paid. And when you're first starting off, finding clients is not the easiest thing in the world when you first start off your business. You don't have a portfolio that you can show people and you don't have the ability to develop a word of mouth campaign very early on. That's something you could develop with time. But in the beginning, you don't have the word of mouth. So finding clients when you first start off is no easy road. And I talk about in my previous videos some tips that you can do to find clients fast. So if you want to hear more about that, definitely check out those videos. I'll link them in the cards. But this video is about all the hardships, all the difficulties, and finding clients, because clients are what pays you. That's one of the biggest difficulties you're going to have. And that's a difficulty in the beginning and all throughout your career as a freelancer. And that's why I'm big on the whole entire concept of finding ways to have ongoing recurring revenue streams. That way you'll be able to weather some of the downtime. All right, so finding clients is tough. And then you have the irregularity of income. You're going to have times where money's coming in. There's a peak season to every single cycle, especially in the business world. And then there's going to be times where you have no money coming in. So you have to be able to balance that, how to save up for those rainy days where it seems like nobody's knocking on your door. Do you have a support system around you? And do you have the ability to save up money for the eventuality that money's not coming in? And that's the thing. Unlike a regular 9-to-5, unlike a regular job, you're not getting a salary. You're not getting a steady paycheck every 2 weeks coming in. 1 month you might have 2 or 3 clients that pay you a good amount of money, and then you might not see another client for another month or 2. So you have to be prepared for that. And in the beginning, that could be a shock, because if you're used to having a paycheck come in every other week, every 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you're not having paychecks come in and you're having to wait on clients to pay you, that could be a shock to your system, a shock to your way of life. It's typical that once you get a paycheck, you start developing a rhythm. You develop a cycle of how you're going to pay your bills. But with freelancing, the rhythm could be all over the map. It could be all over the place. So you have to definitely be prepared for that. Then you got to be prepared for the fact that sometimes you're going to get clients that are late on payments, or sometimes they just don't pay. Now, in New York, we have a new piece of legislation that passed a while back in the city and in the state that says that freelance isn't free. So now freelancers are definitely guaranteed protections under the law when it comes to making sure they get paid for the services they provide. But with that, you have to be able to have strong contracts. You have to be very mindful of what you put in your contract in terms of the payment terms, when you expect to get paid, when services will be finalized. And if you're going to have ongoing maintenance, you have to be able to spell that out. And you have to be clear of what happens if there's a late payment. You can't go in there all hostile, because at the end of the day, people want to make sure they're getting the service that they're paying for. And you have to believe that, people are genuinely good. Yeah, you're going to have some people that end up paying late. You're going to have some people that decide to renegotiate the terms of your contract. That's going to happen. That's another thing you're going to have to be mindful of. Another thing is work-life balance. I mean, it's hard when you're a freelancer and you're just starting off, and you're working from home. How do you balance your life? I've always struggled with this part of it, because there's always something for you to work on. There's always something for you to do. And it seems like the clock is never off. And you have friends and you have family and you're going to want to hang out with them. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, your computer's right there. You know there's something you want to work on. You say you're going to give it just 5 minutes. And that 5 minutes turns into a couple of hours. And next thing you know, everybody's knocked out. They got to watch the movie together. They got to play the games together. And you got to be there and work. So work-life balance is something that's very important to try to figure out. Now, you're not going to always be balanced. I mean, I'm not a believer that you can actually have a fully balanced life, because there's going to be times that you work harder than other times. And there's going to be times where you get to relax a little bit. I mean, there's some days that I spend hours in front of a computer just, working on a project, coding, researching, debugging, and trying to figure out what to do next in terms of that particular project. Ideating the workflow, the path. And time can fly. And those days could be 10, 12 hours that I'm just there coding. But then there's times where I'm not doing as much. And one of my favorite times, I was able to travel the entire United States. I did a road trip with the family. I went through 26 states. It was during the lockdown. And I figured, you know what? We were supposed to travel to Spain. We didn't get to go to Spain. So we figured, let's just drive around the US. And we took the northern route straight to California. And then we went down California, and then we came back through the southern route. And we got to visit 26 states. And that was fun. That was cool. But obviously that took a significant amount of time. That wasn't a 1-week trip. That was close to 3 weeks of driving. And I had the time to do that because obviously, I work from home. But in that case, I worked from the road. I took my laptop, and every night what I did was I spent a little bit of time logging in to see what I needed to manage at that point in time. If I needed to update my servers, if I needed to update any of the websites I'm managing, things of that nature. But I took it a little bit slower during that time. And I got to travel the US. So that was pretty cool. So again, work-life balance, you got to try to figure it out. I'm not a big believer that you can have a fully balanced life, but I am a believer that you have to try to have times where it's about work and times where it's about having fun. Can't be so extreme that you're never having fun. And if you're always having fun, then you're never going to get to work. Now, the thing is, I don't necessarily consider coding work for me, because when I'm coding for projects that I'm working on that are not particularly for clients, to me, that is fun. I like the challenge. I like being able to try to figure out where I can take a particular project, whether it's working on some tools for myself or working for enhancing the features and functionality of the WordPress theme that I sell. For me, that's not really work. Now, when I'm doing client work, that is work. Now, another thing you have to consider is the fact that you're going to have to be able to manage multiple roles. I mean, think about it. When you're a freelancer, especially when you're working for yourself and by yourself, you're taking care of all your responsibilities in terms of managing your appointments and managing your schedule. You're the customer service representative for your freelance business. So that's something you have to remember. And then you have to consider the fact that with a job, with a regular 9 to 5, you get health benefits, you get financial benefits like a 401k. But as a freelancer, you don't get that. You have to figure it out yourself. You have to pay for it yourself. You have to get your own health insurance. You have to start making sure you invest your money properly and save your money, so that way when you get to retire, you have something to retire on. So definitely make sure you take into consideration having to pay for health insurance and having to figure out how you can save money for retirement. I mean, as for me, I don't know when I'm going to retire. When it comes to coding and programming, it's fun. I don't consider it work. So if I could work on my own projects that I can sell, that I'll probably do until AI decides to take everything over. Maybe I'll slow down when it comes to clients, but at that point, I think I'll just create a referral network where I can have a couple of other people that I can refer clients to, and maybe just make a little commission for the referral. Maybe 10%, because that's not bad. If you get, 10 good paying clients every month and you refer them out, you don't really have to do any of the work, but you get a little bit of a commission for referring that out. So that's not bad. That's an option. But as for coding, I'll probably do that till the day I die. But you still should have some way to invest money, to save money, because you want to be able to not worry about that later on in life. And then one very big important thing you have to think about is taxes. You gotta pay your taxes. Very often what happens is you're starting off as a freelancer. Maybe you haven't made money for a month or two. You finally get your first client and you have bills that have mounted up, and you say, you know what? With the next client, I'll save up for taxes. And this one, I gotta pay bills right now. And then you get the next client, and then you say the same thing. Next thing you know, you haven't saved any money at all for your taxes. And that is a big mistake. You gotta make sure you pay your taxes. What you should do is, maybe talk to an accountant and get some details or information on how best to save up for that. Typically, depending on where you live, taxes are different, but typically you should save up, a third of whatever you make for taxes, and then get in the habit of paying quarterly taxes. That way you're not gonna get penalized at the end of the year for not paying your taxes up front. That's something you gotta be mindful of. Now, the next thing is you gotta think about your legal issues. you got to think about how you can make sure you have strong contracts. I know I mentioned contracts earlier, but just want to really harp on this for a second. You want to make sure your contracts are very detailed. So if you have the chance to talk to a lawyer and have them review any of your contracts, or at least your base contract, that's definitely something you may want to consider doing. Next thing is you got to think about skill development. Now, the thing is, the landscape of freelancing is changing all the time. Whatever it is you're doing, if you're a graphic artist, if you're a web designer, if you're a remote worker doing some web development or program development type work, there's always going to be changes within the landscape. So you have to be prepared for that. You have to be able to dedicate some time for continuous learning, for skill development, and to invest time to figure out what's coming next down the road within your industry. You have to make sure you stay on top of that, because you don't want to try to catch up while you're also working on client projects. Because there's going to be times you get multiple clients coming in and you may not be able to dedicate time to learning. So you got to be able to, when times are down, use that time wisely. Enhance your skills on marketing and enhance your skills on whatever it is that you're offering as a service. Then you got to think about project management. Project management is important. You got to be able to figure out how you're onboarding your clients, how you're going to receive the assets that you need in order to get the job done. And then what is the timeline that you're working on in terms of finishing that project? Managing a project is a huge topic. I mean, all these topics that I'm talking about are, very important and have a lot of moving parts. And I could probably do a 30-minute to an hour video on each of those, but it's something you have to consider. And then you got to think about the isolation component of it. One of the biggest benefits of going to a regular job is you get to see people. Now, you might complain about your coworkers and you might complain about how maybe they annoy you or whatever. But when you're working for yourself and by yourself, that isolation is real. Sometimes it can get lonely. So you got to figure that out as well. Do you have a group of friends that you can make time to hang out with? Maybe go to the gym, maybe go to a game, maybe just hang out and just have some fun. What about your family? Basically, you just want to make sure that you're not isolated. And then, of course, you got to worry about market competition. I mean, right now we have about 75 million people are freelancers. So that means in the United States, there's a lot of competition out there, especially now. It seems like everybody's part of the gig economy, right? So you want to be able to make sure that you keep yourself top of mind when people are thinking about getting a service that you provide. That's why I'm a big believer that you have to be a networker. You have to be able to go to events in the community and network with them, with people, with businesses. And you have to be able to make sure that you're developing your ability to market your services online. That is huge. Oh, another thing I forgot to mention when talking about your contracts and when talking about dealing with clients is the issue of scope creep. Scope creep is real. What ends up happening is you say you're going to do a certain amount of services. Let's say you're developing a website and you say you're going to create 10 pages and maybe their first 10 initial posts, and you're going to create an e-commerce based site for them, or you're going to create a regular blog for them. Next thing you know, they're going to say, well, can you make it 12 pages? Because I realized that I needed to do this. And, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal. So you create some additional pages. And when I mean pages, it could be either templates for the actual website, or it could actually mean the content. And with the content comes images. So that takes time, right? So each page takes time. But ultimately, you got to be prepared for the situation where a person's going to be asking for more work to be done. So back to the contracts, you got to be very specific in how you're going to handle any additional work that's outside the scope or outside what's written inside of the contract itself. You're probably going to offer a couple of revision opportunities in case there's any changes in the visual or functional aspects of the actual project. But at some point, you have to draw the line and be very clear. This does take time, and if extra work is needed, there's an additional fee associated with that. Basically, freelancing is not the easiest way to make a living, especially in the beginning. But if you do things correctly, it can be very rewarding and highly lucrative. And that brings me back to one of my favorite quotes from Rocky Balboa, the great philosopher Rocky Balboa. And he says something to the effect. Let me tell you something you already know. The world is a very mean and nasty place. And I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there if you let it. You, me, or nobody is going to hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. And that's what it takes to be a freelancer. All right, so you know what to do. Subscribe, like, and comment. And I'll see you in the next video. Catch you later.